Hey knitters, welcome to my channel. My name is Carrie, and today we're going to talk about my favorite method for weaving in ends. Who enjoys weaving in ends? Not this girl! I will confess that I have had many projects sit unfinished longer than necessary simply because I didn't get around to weaving in the ends. Say that 5 times fast. Weaving in the ends, weaving in the ends, weaving in the ends, weaving in the ends. We're gonna talk about weaving in the ends. So when we weave in our tails, what we're looking for is for the tail one to stay put. We don't want the end of it to work its way to the public side of the fabric, and we certainly don't want the tail to work its way out of the weave, because I think all of us have the nightmare scenario of our work just falling apart. Also, we want the tail, when it's woven into the fabric, to move with the fabric, to stretch with it. Remember, knitting is by and large a practical craft. We usually wear it, and we don't want the tail woven into the fabric to create any distortions. And the other thing is, we want the weave to be discreet. We don't want to be able to look at the fabric and go, oh, right there, that's where they wove in their tail. I can see it. I can see that. There are a few different ways that you can weave in your ends. And the one that I'm going to show you today utilizes duplicate stitch. Now what a duplicate stitch is, it's taking sometimes a scrap of yarn, but in the case of weaving it in your ends, it's taking your tail and it's weaving it through so that it follows the path of the stitches that you've already worked. It can be used both functionally and decoratively in knitting. It can be used to hide mistakes in Fair Isle and intarsia, in plain knitting. For example, if you happen to twist a stitch, you can use a little bit of scrap yarn and duplicate stitch to hide that wayward stitch. But it can also be used decoratively. In Argyle socks, for example, a lot of times those single stitches of lines, diagonal lines, is done with duplicate stitch. So this is a great skill to have in general, and duplicate stitch is a great way to weave in your ends. As always, there are timestamps below if you'd like to skip around any part of the video. So let's knit! In truth, doing duplicate stitch isn't all that complicated. However, in explaining this, I want to make sure we're all really clear on the terms I'm going to use to explain the different segments of a stitch. So I just want to go over what exactly is the anatomy of a knit stitch. If we were to just isolate one stitch from that row, this is what it would look like. And it basically breaks down into 5 segments. So segment 1 is the right running thread. Segment 2 is the right leg. Segment 3 is the purl bump. Segment 4 is the left leg. And segment 5 is the left running thread. So I got this little swatchy swatch here where I did one row of a contrasting color. So you can really see the path that we're going to be following as we weave in ends. The easiest way to weave in your end using duplicate stitch is to do it from the public side of the work. That's fair, that's totally fair, because you can clearly see your right leg, and you can see that right leg is clearly coming out of this stitch from below. And following that right leg, you can see it comes behind this stitch above. And here's that left leg coming out and back into this stitch below. So it's pretty easy on the public side to follow that thread path. However, in my experience, I have noticed that working the tail on the public side of the work makes the weave more noticeable. So my preference is to weave the tail on the private side. But If you look down here, it can be a little confusing. Where's your purl bumps? Where's your running thread? You can't see the left and the right leg from the wrong side of the work. And so it can feel a little bit more complicated to follow that thread path. But really all you need to be able to learn to do is identify your right running thread, the purl bump, and the left running thread. And once you've trained your eyes to do that, it's really not that complicated. So I'm just going to thread up my tapestry needle here. And the first thing we got to do is we need to identify the right running thread. Now, we're on the edge here, and it can be a little tricky. So looking here, right here, this is the right running thread. This is what we want to follow, and where it's going into is right here. This is actually the purl bump of the row below. So I'm going to just bring my tapestry needle right up through there, like that. Easy peasy. Now you want to identify where your purl bump is. So right here, here's my purl bump, and where that's coming out of is here, okay? This is actually the right running thread of the row above where we're working our duplicate stitch. So I'm going to put my needle through that right running thread of the row above. Now, here's my purl bump, and I'm going to just follow that through to this left, right there, this left running thread of the row above, through and down. Now, where do I go? Notice both the right running thread and the left running thread are going through this purl bump. So you're going to enter through this purl bump, and you're going to come back down through that same purl bump of the row below. And this is really important to understand. So there, we've done one duplicate stitch. I'll show you again on another stitch. So here's the right running leg, and we're going to go up into the purl bump of the row below. Next, we have to find the purl bump of the stitch that we're duplicating, and that is right here. That purl bump is coming out of this right running thread of the row above. So we're going to go up through there like this, and then follow that purl bump down into the left running thread of the row above, and then back down into the purl bump of the row below. This is the same purl bump that we first entered into. We'll get to a few more duplicate stitches. Right running thread up through the purl bump, up through the right running thread, down through the left running thread, down through the purl bump. One thing as you're doing this is you do want to try to make these duplicate stitches roughly the same tension or size of the stitch that you're duplicating. The reason is, again, you want this weave to move and stretch with the fabric, and so you want these duplicate stitches to be around the same tension. Let me show you what the public side of the work is looking like. So here it is. And I can feel where I've done the weave, and that by feel is the last stitch that I did the duplicate stitch. But if you just visually look at it, I don't think you could see where that tail is woven in. And that's the beauty to me of the duplicate stitch. But also look at this. I'm gonna give this some strong tugs here. Those stitches are moving with the fabric, and I can give it a nice big tug. And look, everything stays put. Look on this side. Nothing. That has not come loose at all. And the reason is because it's woven into the fabric just like any other stitch. And that is going to stay put. That is a very secure tail. One thing I really like about duplicate stitch as well is in order to have a nice secure weave, you only need to weave this in for like 2 inches if I'm working with cotton yarn, I might do 3 inches, just because cotton is a little slippier and a little bit more, you know, wanting to escape. Cotton, it's slippery. Do I use duplicate stitch for every situation? No. 1x1 ribbing, seed stitch, fair isle, basically situations where it can be tricky to identify the stitch path. Duplicate stitch isn't necessarily great for. There are other methods to weave in your ends that work very well, and I will utilize them in certain situations, but I just find that duplicate stitch does a great job at hitting all the things I want a weave to do. As always, thank you for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, if you enjoyed it, I hope that you'll share it with your friends and give it a thumbs up. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm and kind of getting my channel out there. Also, if you want to find out more ways to weave in ends, I am planning future videos to discuss using duplicate stitch with garter fabric, as well as other methods to weave in ends. I don't know exactly when I'm going to do those, but I do plan to do them in the future. And so if you're just on the edge of your seat, like, oh my gosh, I gotta know, how do you use duplicate stitch for garter fabric? Well, hit subscribe and the notification bell, and it will let you know every time I upload a new video. Down below in the description box, you'll find all my social media. I am on Ravelry, Twitter, and Instagram. That's it for today. I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, whenever you're watching this. Happy knitting. Bye. I'm exhausted. Today, okay. Stitch, 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 stitch. I don't know what I'm saying. That's pretty much what duplicate stitch is. I got an itch. Oh, this chair went up. This chair, this chair is old and it rises up by itself. I don't know how it manages that, but it does. I'm doing this all over again because that was terrible. I'm doing this again. Let's just get a drink and reset. I'm gonna have a little drinky drink and reset the moment. Non-alcoholic drinky drink. I'm drinking kombucha today. I want to weave it. I gotta weave it. The project's not finished. It's woven. Time's up.